Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ogden. I'm Dylan Zwick, and I will be the worship lead today. Please put your phones on silent, but feel free to take pictures of the service and to post what you hear and see online. Send the message to the broader community. If you're new here today, welcome. Thank you for coming. Please fill out a visitor card in the pews and put it in the offering basket when it comes by later. And please stay and chat with us after the service. The UU Church is an open, tolerant place where diversity of thought is encouraged, sought, and appreciated. It doesn't matter who you love or how you identify yourself. We come here because we want to think for ourselves. We ask questions, value the exchange of ideas, want to hear from others, and want to be challenged. There are a range of beliefs among those here. Generally, though, we believe in caring for the planet and for one another. We are a lay-led ministry, which means the messages come from everybody here. Accordingly, the presence of each and every one of you adds to the atmosphere, and we're glad you're here. All right, so few announcements. So first off, we announced this last week, but we'd like to restart the membership committee, and we're looking for volunteers. The membership committee is responsible for reaching out to potential new members and helping them become a part of our church, along with keeping up with current members. If you'd be interested in being a part of this, please let me know. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is hosting an interfaith concert in the Ogden Tabernacle on Sunday, September 10th at 7 p.m. Admission is free and tickets are not needed. However, if we'd like to sit in an area as a group, we can. Please let me know if you'd like to come, and I can get you tickets. Now for our singing bowl. Tim will light the chalice for us today. Please come forward. And please join us all in the lighting of the chalice. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, for the light of truth, and for the energy of action. Thank you, Tim. Our opening hymn today is The Ceaseless Flow of Endless Time, number 350 in your hardback hymn.
I'll play the full hymn as an introduction, then we'll do verse 1, verse 2, and then back to verse 1.
Ceaseless flow of endless time, no one can check or say. We'll feel the past with no regret, no future with dismay. Our presence lives into the past, and green light melts away. Tomorrow's begins anew today. A ceaseless flow of endless time, no one can check or say. The past with no regret, no future with dismay.
I'm generally a fan of pretentious titles for some of these talks, but I think I may have outdone myself this week. The Work of Humanity in the Age of Mechanical Thought is a play upon one of the most famous art history essays in the 20th century, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. It's an examination of how our relationship to art, both historic art and the creation of new art, changed as a result of the development of the photograph and photography. In 1972, the English broadcaster John Berger produced a series of 4 episodes for the BBC about art entitled Ways of Seeing, and his first episode drew heavily upon this famous essay. We're going to attempt to watch the first half of this first episode here. I believe we will be able to see and hear it just fine. There are subtitles if we have problems, but it's always a gamble when you're dealing with AV stuff. But here we go.
This is the first of 4 programs in which I want to question some of the assumptions usually made about the tradition of European painting. That tradition which was born about 1400, died about 1900. Tonight, it isn't so much the paintings themselves which I want to consider as the way we now see them, now in the second half of the 20th century, because we see these paintings as nobody saw them before. If we discover why this is so, we shall also discover something about ourselves and the situation in which we are living. The process of seeing paintings or seeing anything else is less spontaneous and natural than we tend to believe. A large part of seeing depends upon habit and convention. All the paintings of the tradition used the convention of perspective, which is unique to European art. Now, perspective centers everything on the eye of the beholder. It is like a beam from a lighthouse, only instead of light traveling outwards, appearances travel in. And our tradition of art called those appearances reality. Perspective makes the eye the center of the visible world. But the human eye can only be in one place at a time. It takes its visible world with it as it walks. With the invention of the camera, everything changed. We could see things which were not there in front of us. Appearances could travel across the world. It was no longer so easy to think of appearances always traveling regularly to a single center.
I am an eye, a mechanical eye. I, the machine, show your world the way only I can see it. I free myself for today and forever from human immobility. I'm in constant movement. I approach and pull away from objects. I creep under them. I move alongside a running horse's mouth. I fall and rise with the falling and rising bodies. This is I, the machine, maneuvering in the chaotic movements, recording one movement after another in the most complex combinations. Freed from the boundaries of time and space, I coordinate any and all points of the universe wherever I want them to be. My way leads towards the creation of a fresh perception of the world. Thus I explain, in a new way, the world unknown to you.
Those words are from a manifesto written in 1923 by Dziga Vertov, the Russian film director. And the images are from a film he made in 1928 called The Man with a Movie Camera. The invention of the camera has changed not only what we see, but how we see it. And in a crucial but quite simple way, it has even changed paintings painted long before it was invented. The painting on the wall, like a human eye, can only be in one place at one time. The camera reproduces it, making it available in any size, anywhere, for any purpose. Botticelli's Venus and Mars used to be a unique image, which it was only possible to see in the room where it was actually hanging. Now its image, or a detail of it, or the image of any other painting which is reproduced, can be seen in a million different places at the same time. As you look at them now, on your screen, your wallpaper is round them. Your window is opposite them. Your carpet is below them. At this same moment, they are on many other screens, surrounded by different objects, different colors, different sounds. You are seeing them in the context of your own life. They are surrounded not by gilt frames, but by the familiarity of the room you are in and the people around you. Once, all these paintings belonged to their own place. Some were altarpieces in churches. Originally, paintings were an integral part of the building for which they were designed. Sometimes, when you go into a Renaissance church or chapel, you have the feeling that the images on the wall are records of the building's interior life. Together, they make up the building's memory. So much are they part of the life and individuality of the building. Everything around the image is part of its meaning. Its uniqueness is part of the uniqueness of the single place where it is. Everything around it confirms and consolidates its meaning. The extreme example is the icon. Worshippers converge upon it. Behind its image is God. Before it, believers close their eyes. They do not need to go on looking at it. They know that it marks the place of meaning. Now, it belongs to no place, and you can see such an icon in your home. The images come to you. You do not go to them. The days of pilgrimage are over. It is the image of the painting which travels now, just as the image of me standing here in this studio travels to you and appears on your screen. The meaning of a painting no longer resides in its unique painted surface, which it is only possible to see in one place at one time. Its meaning, or a large part of it, has become transmittable. It comes to you, this meaning, like the news of an event. It has become information of a sort. The faces of paintings become messages, pieces of information to be used, even used to persuade us to help purchase more of the originals, which these very reproductions have in many ways replaced. But, you may say, original paintings are still unique. They look different from how they look on the television screen or on postcards. Reproductions distort. Only a few facsimiles don't. Take this original painting in the National Gallery. Only what you are seeing is still not the original. I'm in front of it. I can see it. This painting by Leonardo is unlike any other in the world. The National Gallery has the real one. It isn't a fake, it's authentic. If I go to the National Gallery and look at this painting, somehow I should be able to feel this authenticity. The Virgin of the Rocks by Leonardo da Vinci. It is beautiful for that alone. Nearly everything that we learn or read about art encourages an attitude, an expectation, rather like that. The National Gallery catalogue is for art experts. The entry on this painting is about 14 pages long. densely written. They are about who commissioned the painting, legal squabbles, who owned it, its likely date, the pedigree of its owners. Behind this information lie years of research. What for? To prove beyond any shadow of doubt that it is a genuine Leonardo, and to prove that an almost identical painting in the Louvre is in fact a replica. French art historians try to prove the opposite. For this drawing by Leonardo, the Americans wanted to pay £2.5 million. Now, it hangs in a room by itself, like a chapel, behind bulletproof perspex. The lights are kept low so as to prevent the drawing from fading. But why is it so important to preserve and display this drawing? It's acquired a kind of new impressiveness, but not because of what it shows, not because of the meaning of its image. It's become mysterious again because of its market value. And this market value depends upon it being genuine. And now it is here like a relic in a holy shrine. I don't want to suggest that there is nothing left to experience before original works of art, except a certain sense of awe because they have survived, because they're genuine, because they are absurdly valuable. A lot more is possible, but only if art is stripped of the false mystery and the false religiosity which surrounds it. This religiosity, usually linked with cash value, but always invoked in the name of culture and civilization, is in fact a substitute for what paintings lost when the camera made them reproducible. The National Gallery sell more reproductions of this Leonardo cartoon than of any other picture. But what are the meanings these reproductions acquire in each home when they're hung or pinned to the wall? And how different are all these meanings from its original one, when Leonardo first worked on it to work out an idea for a painting? The camera, by making the work of art transmittable, has multiplied its possible meanings and destroyed its unique original meaning. Have works of art gained anything by this? They have lost and gained. Let me try to explain how. The most important thing about paintings themselves is that their images are silent, still. I can't demonstrate the stillness, for the lines on your screen are never still. And in a sense, the pages of a book are never still. But I can demonstrate the silence. Occasionally, this uninterrupted silence and the stillness of a painting can be very striking. The experience of this has almost nothing to do with what anybody teaches about art. It's as if the painting, absolutely still, soundless, becomes a corridor, connecting the moment it represents with the moment at which you are looking at it. And something travels down that corridor at a speed greater than light, throwing into question our way of measuring time itself. Because paintings are silent and still, and because their meaning is no longer attached to them, but has become transmittable, paintings lend themselves to easy manipulation. They can be used to make arguments or points which may be different, very different, from their original meaning. And because paintings are essentially silent and still, the most obvious way of manipulating them is by using movement and sound. The camera moves in to remove a detail of a painting from the whole. Its meaning changes. An allegorical figure becomes a pretty girl anywhere. From being part of a strange poetical world of metamorphosis, a dog can be turned into a pet, not unlike the dog of his master's voice. The meaning of a painting shown on film or television can be changed even more radically. This is a painting by Bruegel, or rather a reproduction of a painting by Bruegel, of the Road to Calvary. If you look at the whole painting, Bruegel's intention is fairly clear. In the right foreground are Mary and John and the mourners of Christ. Christ carrying the cross is in the middle distance, carried forward by the crowd, which is making its way to the place of the crucifixes, far away on the right, where a circle of onlookers has already gathered. If you look at the whole picture, you see that it is about grief, about torture, and above all about the callousness, the eager inquisitiveness, the superstitious drive of the crowd. If it sets out to be a religious painting, it is an oddly secular one. But the difficulty is that on a screen, if you keep the whole painting in view, you don't see very much. You have been waiting impatiently for the camera to go in to examine details. Yet, as soon as this happens, the comprehensive effect of the painting can be changed. For example, it is possible to isolate and show the details in a way that makes the painting look like a fairly straightforward devotional picture. With a different camera movement again, it can be shown as an example of landscape painting. Or details can present it to you in terms of the history of costume or social customs. Most easily, it can be presented as a story. The two thieves being carted to the place of crucifixion, Christ carrying the cross. In a film sequence, the details have to be selected and rearranged into a narrative which depends on unfolding time. Yet, in the painting as a whole, all these elements are there simultaneously. In paintings, there is no unfolding time.
The rest of it's pretty interesting too. All right. And before our main talk, Ernie Nylander is going to read an excerpt from Ralph Waldo Emerson's The Oversoul.
I took the class on Emerson in ministerial school. Come to find out that he was a minister, Unitarian minister, for about 3 years, and then he got angry and quit. So this is, oh, come on, straighten up here. Some of his writing. The heart which abandons itself to the supreme mind finds itself related to all its works, and will travel a royal road to particular knowledges and powers in ascending to this primary and aboriginal sentiment. We have come from our remote station on the circumference instantaneously to the center of the world, where, as in the closet of God, we see causes and anticipate the universe, which is but a slow effect. One mode of the divine teaching is the incarnation of the Spirit in a form. Forms like my own, I live in society with persons who answer to thoughts in my own mind, or express a certain obedience to the great instincts to which I live. I see its presence to them. I am certified of a common nature, and these other souls, these separated selves, draw me as nothing else can. They stir in me the new emotions we call passion, of love, hatred, fear, admiration, pity. Thence comes conversation, competition, persuasion, cities, and war. Persons are supplementary to the primary teaching of the soul. In youth, we are mad for persons. Childhood and youth see all the world in them, but the larger experience of man discovers the identical nature appearing through them all. Persons themselves acquaint us with the impersonal. In all conversation between two persons, tacit reference is made as to a third party, to a common nature. That third party or common nature is not social. It is impersonal. It is God. And so in groups where debate is earnest, and especially on high questions, the company becomes aware that the thought arises to an equal level in all bosoms, that all have a spiritual property in what was said as well as the sayer. They all become wiser than they were. It arches over them like a temple, this unity of thought in which every heart beats with nobler sense of power and duty, and thinks and acts with unusual solemnity. All are conscious of attaining to a higher self-possession. It shines for all. There is a certain wisdom of humanity which is common to the greatest men with the lowest, and which our ordinary education often labors to silence and obstruct. The mind is one, and the best minds who love truth for its own sake think much less of property in truth. They accept it thankfully everywhere, and do not label or stamp it with any man's name, for it is theirs long beforehand and from eternity. Ralph Waldo kind of gets you, doesn't it? And here we have Dylan Zwick, and he's so simply honest with me, and I don't know him very well, but he says you all know him really well. And so when he proposed this talk, I said, I am going to be delighted to hear it. Dylan Zwick.
Thank you. We, humanity, have two images that are undoubtedly of William Shakespeare. The first, the Droeshout portrait by Martin Droeshout, or however you pronounce that name, is from the frontispiece for the title page of the first folio produced in 1623 by Shakespeare's theater colleagues John Hemmings and Henry Condell. The second is Shakespeare's funerary monument in Holy Trinity Church at Stratford-upon-Avon, which can still be seen there today. Both were produced posthumously, and so weren't taken directly from life, but were commissioned by people who did know Shakespeare in life and who found the likeness at least acceptable. Neither of them are particularly impressive works of art. But these are probably not the basis for the image in your mind if I ask you to picture Shakespeare. The most famous image associated with Shakespeare is the Chandos portrait, which was donated to the National Portrait Gallery of London on its founding in 1856, and is given preeminence as the first work listed in its collection. It is, in a sense, the founding portrait of that great gallery. Artistically, it's much better than the Droeshout portrait or the funerary monument, and it was almost certainly produced from life, and more specifically from a man sitting still for the portrait. The only problem is, we don't actually know that it's Shakespeare. It probably is. was certainly painted in London at the time when Shakespeare was both there and prominent, and it's from a painter, John Taylor, who made many specifically identified portraits of Shakespeare's contemporaries like Richard Burbage. Furthermore, it does look like the person in the Chandos portrait could have, after about 15 or 20 years of continued hair loss and enthusiastic drinking, become the older person depicted in the other two likenesses. But we don't know, and almost certainly never will. So it's possible that the primary foundation for our vision of the world's most famous playwright is, in fact, just some guy, otherwise unremarkable, who lived in London at that time. A plausible, but ultimately incorrect hallucination. While the paucity of portraits of such a prominent person might seem very odd to us today, that we have any depictions of Shakespeare's likeness makes him a rarity for his time. A portrait back then was an expensive vanity. The most prominent people, like Queen Elizabeth I, of course, generated many depictions, but the overwhelming majority who lived back then generated none at all. That we live in an era of absurdly abundant portraits is a very new development, even within the much more limited history of mechanical reproduction.
What about in the old days when they took pictures of you way back, you know, where they pulled that thing and exploded and stuff? I got a picture of my great-grandfather. The thing took 6 hours to take your picture, and there's a picture of my great-grandfather, one. They only had, every guy had one picture back then. And it's just him like, I gotta get back, feed them hogs. Who's gonna feed the hogs? Somebody gotta feed them hogs. Now, in the future, of course, it'll be different. 50 years from now, people will be going like, hey, you want to see 100,000 pictures of my great-grandfather? I got him right here, plus everything he did every day of his life. What about in the old?
Mechanical reproduction has transformed our experience of the visual world around us, and even our place within it. Here on the screen are Michelangelo's frescoes from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. We're all, in a sense, looking at them right now. I've seen them many times in my life and have spent a little time studying them. But in another sense, I've never seen them. I've never even been to Italy, and so the experience and understanding that comes from witnessing them in the awesome context in which they were designed and for which they were intended has been transformed and partly lost. Even if I were to go there, which I very much hope sometime I will, the astonishment of seeing them for the first time in their original glory is not a possibility for me. When it comes to the Sistine Chapel, we might really view that as a loss. However, to be perfectly frank, the experience of seeing the original Mona Lisa is one I can't particularly recommend relative to viewing it on the screen or on a page. It's inevitably surrounded by a mob of tourists who are almost all, ironically, jostling to create their own inferior but personal mechanical reproductions. We are right now at the beginning of a technological transformation in our relation to the visual world that will likely be at least as profound as the development of mechanical reproduction, and the visual image will only be one, and probably not the most significant, of the areas it will impact. I'm talking not about mechanical reproduction, but about mechanical production. I have essentially no artistic skills, and yet I, quote, created the two quite different images you see on the screen of the Mona Lisa laughing. These images are unique in that I didn't get them from anybody else, but instead oversaw their production for the purpose of display at this talk here today. In total, their creation took me about 10 minutes and cost about $2. They were generated by me typing the prompt Mona Lisa laughing into 2 generative AI programs, and then providing some curation and guidance around the images these programs made based upon my prompt. Of course, it's a bit preposterous to say that I created them. Really, they were created mechanically by a computer. My talk today is about what recent developments in mechanical creation might mean. But before we skeptically criticize and fret about whether and to what extent they may transform the world, I think it's important at the outset to acknowledge that, my goodness, is this an amazing and impressive achievement. The ability to play chess well was, for centuries, viewed as an example of a uniquely human mental skill. And a machine that could play chess would be a challenge to our intellectual superiority. On February 10th, 1996, humanity was dealt a stunning defeat. Garry Kasparov, then the top chess player in the world and widely viewed as the best chess player in history, lost to IBM's Deep Blue computer. It was the first game of a 6-game match, and Kasparov rallied to win the tournament 4-2, but it was clear to everybody knowledgeable, including Kasparov, that humanity's time at the top would be over soon, and we'd never get it back. Sure enough, at a rematch the next year, Kasparov lost. And today, the best computer chess programs play at a level far above even the best humans. Magnus Carlsen, widely considered, including by Kasparov, to be the greatest human being to ever play the game, has described playing one of these computers to be like playing a crazy person who makes bizarre nonsense moves in the middle of the game and then beats you. Now, of course, chess is just a board game, and being able to play it well is a frivolity. We don't really think playing chess well is an essential, distinguishable characteristic of humanity. But what is? Well, about 20 years ago, I took a graduate AI course, and I was surprised to find out that while computers were quite a bit better than people at the game Othello, and had surpassed people at chess, the best computers were still way behind the best people in the ancient Chinese board game Go. You see, there were really 2 important aspects to being able to play a board game. One was the simple ability to play out moves in your head. If I do this, they'll do that, then I can do this, then they can do that, etc. Go through the different possibilities and see what options there are 3, 4, 5, or 6 moves out. Computers had been much better than people at that for quite some time. And for games like Othello, in which that's incredibly important, computers were dominant. But the other aspect was essentially the ability to recognize patterns. The ability to notice similarities among the game being played and games seen before, and to see where things were going, even if you didn't know precisely. This abstract pattern recognition plays an important role in chess, but it's huge in Go. And it's much harder to program that into a computer. Consequently, 20 years ago, computers weren't that good at Go. 7 years ago, a computer beat the best Go player in the world. And today, the best computers are significantly better than the best people. Machine learning is the area of computer science that attempts to create computer programs that can learn to do things without being explicitly told how. In other words, instead of being given exact instructions, the computer is given a fundamental mechanism for learning, and a set of examples known as its training data upon which to learn. Combining this fundamental learning mechanism with the training data, the program tries to learn how to do something and how to do it well without being explicitly told how. I posit that it's this capacity for pattern recognition and abstract thought that most essentially makes us human. There's an element of it in board games, but of course it's much more important for things like fiction writing, music composition, painting, or original mathematics research. So is it possible to teach computers how to do these things? If not, what are the impediments? Is there something profoundly different between the fundamental learning mechanism within our brain and the ones that we've developed for computers? Or is the difference more one of degree and not of kind? Is it possible to produce human or even superhuman performance from computers on activities we view as essentially human? One of the most academically gifted people I met as an undergraduate was a man named Jared Kaplan. He was a fellow physics major who, although 2 years behind me, was in a few of my advanced undergraduate classes his freshman year before he leapt ahead of me, doing graduate study and cutting-edge research into quantum gravity while still an undergraduate. I lost touch with him after graduation, but about a year ago, another friend of mine asked me if I was aware of what Jared had been up to. I said no, but I'd assume he's a tenured theoretical physics professor at some prestigious university. My friend said, yes, that's true, but that Jared had essentially left physics. Given how devoted Jared was to physics when I knew him and how talented he was at it, this surprised me. So I looked him up, and he's still a physics professor at Johns Hopkins, but it's an amazing quality of being tenured that you can essentially abandon your subject of study without losing your job. I've watched a few talks Jared's given where he goes over the reasons for his jump, and I'll try to summarize them here. At the height of his career, he was faced with an unpleasant and inconvenient fact, one that's been confronting the theoretical physics community for a while now, and that more and more of its members are being resigned to acknowledge. Specifically, there's not much interesting going on in fundamental physics. The theories that we have do a remarkably good job of explaining the universe we can observe, and while there are still unanswered questions and competing mechanisms for resolving them, the experimental data we'd need in order to probe the frontiers of our knowledge is incredibly hard and prohibitively expensive to acquire. Consequently, things are pretty stagnant. And today it looks like the fundamental physics of the 21st century will look a lot like the fundamental physics of the 20th. So, wanting to live his life investigating the most interesting questions he could find, Jared was in a bit of a crisis. He talked about this with some of his friends from college, and a few convinced him to come work with them at a company called OpenAI during a sabbatical year and learn more about machine learning, which they were convinced was about to be the most impactful subject in the world. Jared, who had before only been vaguely aware of machine learning, took up the offer and tried to utilize his skill by studying the subject from the perspective of a physicist. Well, one important idea in physics is the notion of scale and emergent phenomena. Specifically, how do systems behave as their size increases by orders of magnitude? And what general phenomena do we start to see at these different size levels? For example, we have some decent models for precisely understanding individual molecules and how a few of them interact, but to precisely model the unimaginably huge number of molecules that make up the air within this room is completely impossible. However, when you get enough molecules interacting within a small enough space, some general phenomena start to emerge that we can understand with surprising precision. One such phenomena is temperature, a characteristic of systems with a very large number of molecules, which we can model and predict with remarkable precision. Along these lines, Jared and some co-authors published a paper in January 2020 called Scaling Laws for Natural Language Models, where he examined what sort of emergent phenomena we can expect from very large and complicated machine learning models. The outcome of this examination was an idea backed up by both theoretical reasoning and empirical results that machine learning models will get better in a predictable way as a result of modifying three parameters: the number of variables in the model, the amount of training data, and the total compute time used for training. The important idea here was that in order to achieve human or even superhuman performance, a profound breakthrough in the fundamental mechanism was not necessary. The standard approaches that had been around for decades were enough. They just required more resources, and with more resources, they would keep getting better. This insight was the foundation for a model called GPT-3. Here, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and it's a tool for generating words based upon previously generated words. GPT-1 wasn't all that impressive. It was essentially like the autocomplete tool most of us have on our text messaging applications. Useful, to be sure, but basic. GPT-2 was far more impressive. It could do remarkably well for a sentence or two, but usually after about one paragraph, it was pretty easy to identify as artificial. Its generative text was repetitive, vague, and wordy. An interesting demonstration tool, but the practical applications of a bullshit machine weren't obvious. And on the left, you see here, this beginning here was a prompt describing Edward Snowden winning the 2020 election, and it was asked to write a whole paragraph based upon that prompt that was the news that resulted from that election. For GPT-3, the amount of training data and compute resources were enormously expanded based upon faith in the scaling laws I mentioned earlier. The results were frankly mind-blowing. Here's an example of a poem it generated when asked to create one in the style of Wallace Stevens with the title Shadows on the Way. It's very good. This GPT-3 model was the foundation for the tool ChatGPT, which generates responsive text based upon an input prompt and is without doubt the most significant new consumer technology released in the past 5 years. So what is it that facilitated the development of GPT-3? Well, as I mentioned before, it was not any profound breakthrough in the underlying mechanism used to train it. That had been around for decades. What made GPT-3 possible was the following: an absolutely enormous corpus of text upon which to train. It essentially read the internet. A huge expansion in the computational resources made available through cloud computing and improvements in GPUs, and the willingness to spend tens of millions of dollars training a model without any guarantee of exactly what it would be able to do or exactly what problems it would solve. That willingness was key, but I should stress here that while the developers of GPT-3 had a well-reasoned belief that their creation would be impressively performant, they were actually quite surprised by just how good it was and how many things it was able to do. One reason GPT-3 was so surprising comes from another analog with physics. Specifically, an emergent phenomenon observed within large, complex physical systems that seems to have analogies in large, complex machine learning models. Phase transitions. A phase transition is something like the transition from ice to water that we observe at 0 degrees Celsius, or from water to steam that we observe at 100. It's a dramatic transition that occurs suddenly when certain conditions are met. We see this kind of behavior in GPT-3. For example, its ability to perform arithmetic. Early iterations of the model were able to reproduce simple examples that seen many times within its training data, like 1 + 1 = 2, but would usually fail when given larger, more complicated examples that had never seen before, like 687,984 times 126,974. However, at a certain point within its training, the model suddenly got it. In other words, figured out, without specific guidance, what the fundamental rules of arithmetic are. Suddenly, it was able to correctly perform essentially any arithmetic calculation, regardless of whether it had specifically seen it in the training data. This didn't happen gradually. It was a sudden revelation, and it turns out many, if not most, of the things GPT-3 figured out were like this. Perhaps the most interesting emergent skill GPT-3 expressed, which surprised even its makers, was the ability to write computer programs. If you give ChatGPT instructions to write a program in a given programming language that does certain things that you prescribe, it's frequently able to either do so or get remarkably close. Sorry, there's an image issue there. So what is it? Oh, sorry. Now, GPT-3 was the first and still most famous example. Sorry, let me real quick. Do something here. There we go. There we go. Now, GPT-3 was the first and still most famous example of a general type of tool called a large language model, or LLM. But since its release, there have been many others in its wake. Right now, there are three big problems facing LLMs. The first is, ironically, how to make these large language models smaller. Right now, in order to use them, you need to connect to a large server, which means you need to have an internet connection and compete with other users. A big question is, how much of the value obtained from these LLMs can be captured in smaller models that can be locally deployed within your phone, your car, or your robot servant? Second, LLMs suffer from a tendency to hallucinate. In other words, the responses they produced are based upon their best guess as to what to say in accordance with all the data they've observed, without regard for or even any understanding of whether their response is true. Like identifying the Chandos portrait as being Shakespeare, an LLM may confidently communicate something that seems true as being true, while in reality, it has no clue. There are examples, for instance, of an LLM being asked to write a legal document and it just making up plausible sounding names for non-existent cases that it cites. Third, these LLMs and generative AI tools more broadly have the potential to be awesomely powerful. We need to make sure this power is constrained to operate in tune with human goals and human values. One example of how these LLMs can get off track was provided by a group of researchers trying to see how well ChatGPT could produce potential business plans. The researchers gave ChatGPT the task of offering potential ways a hypothetical LLM business could beat its competitors. One of the solutions it came up with was to hire hitmen to kill the top researchers working for their rivals. Now, I think Putin might tell you approaches along these lines can be effective, but assassinating AI researchers is a rather scary suggestion, particularly if you happen to be one. Making sure that AI models operate in ways that conform to human values is broadly termed alignment. And it's a very important problem. In fact, I mentioned my old friend Jared transitioned from theoretical physics to machine learning because he was interested in working on problems he thought would be the most important in his lifetime. Well, about 2.5 years ago, he was part of a group of former OpenAI employees who broke off to found their own company, Anthropic, which is focused on building AI models centered around human values. In other words, he thinks alignment is the most important problem in the world. Returning back to art and images, the massive proliferation of digital cameras and the ability to upload and share electronic pictures on the internet has created a corpus of image data that has allowed researchers to build generative tools using the same fundamental approaches as were used for text generation, and the results are similarly impressive. Mechanical reproduction created new forms of visual art, photography, and then movies, while profoundly transforming both our relationship to the visual art of the past and our conception of the visual art of the present. The 20th century movement towards abstract art was driven in part by the removal of painting's unique capacity to produce mimetic images. The advent of mechanical production will no doubt be more transformative, introducing new forms of art and types of artists. I wonder whether art produced by people will become a category valued for its scarcity and not really for any human or inherent superiority, in a way similar to how original artwork is valued today relative to its mechanical reproduction. We are not yet at a point where AI is capable of producing and explaining profound or groundbreaking mathematical research. It's unclear how far away that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 30 years, computers are as far ahead of people in theoretical mathematics as they are ahead today in chess. In such a world, it's possible that almost every person on the planet would have perpetual access to a brilliant, patient, electronic personal tutor that could help them learn mathematics in any field and at any level. In other words, the individual opportunity for acquiring knowledge and the ability to use it would be far greater than it is today. But in exchange, we've permanently lost the joy and challenge of discovery. Could we learn to just love truth for its own sake, even if the work for its discovery is no longer our own? To be honest with you, I'm not excited about this future. It seems a Faustian bargain, but perhaps I'm not appreciating the potential. The practical value of theoretical mathematics isn't always clear, particularly even to mathematics researchers. But what about something more concrete like a cure for pediatric cancer or Alzheimer's disease? If the research and experimenting around these were fundamentally guided by artificial intelligence, and this led to beneficial breakthroughs at a massively accelerated pace, would I really be all that disappointed that the satisfaction of discovery was removed from human resources or researchers, or would I just be grateful for the results? I lean towards the latter. In fact, a world controlled by a beneficent, omnipresent superintelligence is not that far removed from many Western conceptions of heaven. What concerns me the most about such a scenario isn't really how humanity will derive meaning if we're no longer supremely intelligent. What concerns me is that within a world where everything is provided for us by intelligent mechanical servants, we'll no longer be dependent on each other. The interconnected web of mutual, self-interested support that is the foundation for society might no longer be necessary. My hope is that even if we do not need each other for survival, we'll still need and want to love one another. We'll need each other to be happy and find value in each other's happiness. And that will be our source of meaning in the end. All right. So I've gone a bit over time, and I'd like to ask your permission, if we can, to skip candles and stones today. Assent? All right. Our closing hymn is number, oh, sorry. We want to do the offering. Good. Now, please join in calling for the offering. Now, please stand and body your voice, and facing the center aisle, sing together the offering song printed in your order of service. You I receive, together we share Thank you for giving. This money helps this church in our efforts to improve the world in big ways and small. And now for our closing hymn. Number 164 in your softback hymnal, Blue Boat Home. Thank you. As the service comes to an end, join me in saying the chalice extinguishing words in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, nor the energy of life. Thank you, everybody. And you can join us for coffee and conversation across the parking lot. Post-lude now.